So the Washington Post is at it again with their latest op-ed, smashing the Bernie bros, saying that we are the problem. I know that I'm actually a female, so I don't know if this applies. I don't know if I'm sexist against Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris, but apparently we are the problem. But they've amended it to include me, thankfully, and Nomi and the other capital P progressives, to call us Bernie bros and sisters. Thank you, Dana Milbank of the Washington Post op-ed column, who now has included women in his definition. He starts this off by saying, things could go well for the Democrats in next year's midterm elections if they don't burn out. President Trump's woefully unpopular, feuding with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and other Republicans. The GOP can't manage to repeal Obamacare or do much of anything. Voters say they'd like Democrats to run Congress. But here come the Bernie bros and sisters to the Republicans' rescue. They're sowing division in the Democratic Party and attempting to enact a purge of the ideologically impure, just the sort of thing that made the Republican Party the ungovernable mess it is today. Bernie Sanders' advisors are promoting a litmus test under which Democrats who don't swear to implement single-payer health care would be booted from the party in primaries. Sanders pollster Ben Tolchin penned an op-ed with a colleague under the headline, Universal Health Care is the new litmus test for Democrats. Nina Turner, head of Sanders group Our Revolution, I guess another one of the Bernie sisters, told Politico this week that there's something wrong with Democrats who won't unequivocally embrace Medicare for all. So that is true. There is something wrong with Democrats that don't do that because an overwhelming majority of Americans want Medicare for all. They want single payer, but when you phrase it as Medicare for all, they want it even more. And having that as a litmus test for the party makes sense because the majority of Americans want it. So if you want to actually represent Americans and want to win, you would back popular proposals. But I don't know if winning is their primary objective. It really is just to appease corporate donors and play good cop to the Republicans, bad cop. This op-ed writer clearly does not know how to win, and why we listen to these losers who continue to say play towards the center like we have for decades is beyond me. Why I know why the Washington Post gives these guys credence, but why anyone should listen to the Washington Post op-ed pieces like this is beyond me, really.
I just want to read one more part.
Sorry.
That notion, not just taking a stand, but excommunicating all who disagree, is what Republicans have done to themselves with guns and taxes, and it would seriously diminish Democrats' hope of retaking the House next year.
But guns and taxes, those positions are extremely unpopular. After Sandy Hook, almost 90% of Americans wanted background checks on people buying assault weapons. And Republicans said, no, we will not let that pass. None of us will let that pass. And taxes? Another overwhelming percentage of Americans don't want taxes on the wealthy. So
Do want taxes.
do want taxes on the wealthy. So this is apples and oranges, and it's purposely deceptive because they're comparing an extremely popular proposal like Medicare for all to an extremely unpopular proposal. Here's a tip to Democrats: run on popular proposals. I know that's nuts. I know it's nuts.
So before I get into this column, I have a radical idea. If I owned the New York Times or the Washington Post, you know what I would make a mandatory?
Are you Jeff Bezos?
A mandatory. No, I'm a good-hearted person.
Okay.
I would make my columnists actually leave New York and D.C. and go out into the country and speak with people, because this guy obviously has not, and Paul Krugman has certainly not, and Nicholas Kristof is a little better, definitely not, and I could go down the list. All these columnists are cocktail crowd elitists living in New York and D.C. by the large majority. And they basically are paid very, very wealthy to come up with hot takes. But the problem is they, like the politicians, are so disconnected from the true struggle of the majority of Americans. So let's just start with the beginning about how backwards this guy is. Not only in is he ethically wrong, but just political strategy. So he thinks that the Democrats are lined up to win because President Trump is woefully unpopular, feuding with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and other Republicans. The GOP can't manage to repeal Obamacare or do much of anything. Voters say they like Democrats to run Congress. So this whole thing, that paragraph that he just wrote, is essentially Trump's bad, Trump's bad, Trump's bad, they're going to elect us. How'd that work out in November? They're still going on this ridiculous theory that Trump is going to be so unpalatable that, okay, just they'll thrust the Democrats back into office. The problem is, the big problem, who votes in midterm elections? Predominantly older Americans. Younger people generally don't come out for midterm elections. And they're certainly not going to come out if the tagline for the midterm election is President Trump is woefully unpopular, feuding with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and other Republicans. The GOP can't manage to repeal Obamacare or do much of anything. Voters say they'd like Democrats to run Congress. I don't know. I meet a lot of young people and millennials. I really don't know many millennials that will come out and vote for John Ossoff type candidates or whatever Dana Milbank is trying to put forward. So that's number one. There's this false notion by the columnists and the pundits and the Democratic establishment, Pelosi, that we just got to make Trump so unpalatable and point out the awful things he's doing that we'll win by default. The problem is Trump is depicting a narrative of it's the media and the establishment against us. And he is still going to be able to rouse his base, which is predominantly older and white, to come out. So Dana Milbank is wrong. The second thing that is ridiculous, but here come Dana Milbank without phrasing it. I want to know what you think about this. Without using the terms, he's basically trying to equate the progressive left, which would be Emma, myself, Young Turks, others, with the Tea Party. He's making a comparison, like Republicans of the last decade have done. He's talking about the Tea Party because they were what he's saying is they were the Puritans who had a purity test. And no, the difference is we have a purity test to help American people. They had a purity test based on racism and extremism and shrinking government down to the size of your, what do they call it? Shrink government down to the size where it could drown in the bathtub. Your thoughts?
Oh, or like a peanut or some other small object would be good, like my earring. That I lost one in the tub one time. But
the audience knows how. You know what? Do you know that I love baths?
I
tweet in the bathtub in the morning. I do a lot of my writing for my book in the bathtub, and lately I've been listening to a lot of Third Eye Blind and Coldplay. Go on.
And he has this weird thing of letting the water run.
Yeah, I know. I literally just had my roommate say to me yesterday, "You take more baths than anyone I know." So that's what we have in common beyond the progressive movement. But shoot, I had something. Oh, okay. So the Tea Party base really was based on racism, but the Tea Party politicians are, yes, racist maybe in their own right, but their business was deregulate, corporate donors, big money donors, etc. So they tricked their base into thinking that they were for them and they were populists, that were going to go after all those bad blacks and Latinos, but really they were essentially corporatists in racist clothing. So that's what the Tea Party movement was. But I don't even want to spend time discrediting the Tea Party movement because we already know that. What I think is interesting is that the Tea Party movement was treated with legitimacy by the mainstream press because they are a conservative base. The Tea Party protests were covered, so remember when that was the largest protest on the congressional steps. I forget what it was for money in politics. Democracy Spring. I'm sorry, I was blanking. So the Democracy Spring protest broke records. Could you imagine if that was Tea Party people marching on Washington, how much the media would cover it? They love covering the Republican base because it's all about economic deregulation, and it's not challenging their status quo like CNN, MSNBC. But liberal bases get no coverage. Liberal protests, with the exception of the Women's March, really get no coverage. And that's because the liberal base is spat on by the Democratic Party while the conservative base is embraced by the Republican Party. So we are essentially treated as lepers while mainstream Democrats and all of the Republicans are kind of embraced by media and by public discourse. So he's operating under that same principle, that liberal, hippie left, blech, like ever since Reagan, embrace the right, this is a center-right country, and we are the fringe group. And that's what's frustrating about op-eds like this, is because they are decades behind the times and still in that same mindset of the country is center-right, when on every single issue, healthcare, tax the rich, marijuana, I could go on and on, the country is certainly center-left, if not left in terms of polling.
And I think he's also confused because I haven't been advocating this. He says that notion, not just taking a stand, but excommunicating all who disagree, is what Republicans have done to themselves with guns and taxes and la la la. Who the hell's talking about excommunicating anyone? We're just going to outvote you. We're going to out-organize you. We're going to out-mobilize you. I don't care if Neera Tanden, John Podesta, Jennifer Palmieri, the CNN, the Hillbots want to get together and talk about the centrist days and, we need better training. Let them have their meals. Let them have their gatherings. Let them have their media. We are not saying people need to be excommunicated. We're saying we're just taking over through what democracy is supposed to be, peaceful protests, peaceful organizing, and outvoting you.
We're saying we're taking the keys because you clearly don't know how to drive. Like, you're clearly drunk behind the wheel, drunk on that corporate money, so we gotta take the keys. No drinking and driving in the Democratic Party.
Right, and also, did they say this about Howard Dean in 2003 and 2004? I don't think Howard Dean was, as progressive as Bernie Sanders, but he was considered, back in those days, pretty progressive. And he was railing about the Democratic Party getting us into Iraq. He was railing about the Democratic Party being complicit in the Bush tax cuts and all those things.
50-state strategy?
50-state strategy. I wasn't paying attention, but I don't remember seeing op-eds about those damn Dean bros and sisters, They basically, and by the way, if this guy, it makes no sense because Dana Milbank, and by the way, Dana Milbank, just a drop in the bucket. There's going to be other columns just like it. It's just the one I saw. But if Dana Milbank is talking about the strategy to win, why wouldn't you be talking about going towards Bernie Sanders' side of the party, which is out polling everybody else? He talks about, and American voters by polls are saying they want the Democrats to run Congress. Well, A, I don't know what polls you're talking about, but B, the Democratic Party as a collective party is polling at its lowest in decades right now. So if he thinks that's going to get it done, again, political strategy, midterm elections, older Americans vote more than younger Americans in midterm elections. Older Americans are the most reliable voters. For the Democrats, African-American women have traditionally been the most reliable voters. But in midterm elections, if you're going to retake the House, you have to excite voters. The same old, if you didn't just notice in 2016, not going to excite voters. So he's either dumb or there's something more deep-seated that's going on. These columnists, these pundits, these politicians just don't want to get rid of the money. They don't want to, quote, change the system. And they are depicting it as radical and now depicting Bernie bros, Bernie sisters as extremists or akin to the Tea Party, which I think is pretty sad. It's sad rhetoric, and it's only going to piss off and mobilize the progressives even further.
Yeah, I just hope the messaging doesn't work. I really do. And I hope that progressives have a really strong showing in 2018, and it has to start here. It has to start now at the grassroots level, having progressive candidates primarying. Yes, sorry guys, primarying corporate Democrats, and also just getting involved in your local communities. Pay attention to who's getting elected in 2018, when those races are, etc., because that's the only way we're going to actually change things and have this litmus test become a reality.